You're listening to the best of the Martha Zoller Show. You can hear the show live Monday through Friday from 9 to 11 on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN and streaming at accesswdun.com. You can find all things Martha Zoller at marthazoller.com. Here's the thing. Joe Biden is not qualified to be president. He is clearly becoming less capacitated with every day. He is unable to read scripts in an appropriate way. He is unable to take more than a couple of questions from the press. He is not qualified to be president. He is president. He was sworn in. He's going to be president until January 20th, 2025. Hopefully, there will be a new president sworn in at that time. Now, let's just assume that Donald Trump is reelected. Okay, I don't know if he'll be the nominee. I think it's a 95% chance. But Donald Trump was kind of a baby at the end of the last term, where he did not go to the inauguration. He did not stand up with the Constitution. And I know he felt he's justified. Clearly, you get 45 seconds into any speech that he makes, and he gives you the reasons why he thinks this election was stolen from him. And you know what? Let me just tell you something, Trump supporters. He is not the first person to ever think that an election was stolen from him. Okay? And I've gone through the list before. I'm not going to go through the list now. And look, this is not anti-Trump. This is, I want you to envision January 20th, 2025. Let's assume that Donald J. Trump is elected for another term. And beautiful Melania is at his side. How would you feel if a whole bunch of people that were in office didn't show up for that swearing in? Maybe you wouldn't care, but I think it's important for Americans to show unity. Now, maybe I watched too much Designated Survivor over the holidays. That was my binge watch go-to over the holidays. Have you watched it?
I have not, no.
Oh, my God, no. Logan, you have got to watch it. It is like the best.
That's your go-to?
Yes, it was my go-to. It's a show from like 2016, 2017 with Kiefer Sutherland. He was the designated survivor. The Capitol gets blown up, and he's the only one left. There's him and two members of Congress that are left, and that's it. So maybe I've watched too much of that. But I think unity is important. I think accepting defeat, even if you don't think it's fair, getting behind whoever won, and at least for some period of time, working together, the honeymoon period, whatever you want to call it. And I will say to you also, Donald Trump didn't get this. Everybody showed up, but he did not get the honeymoon period. Okay? He was treated unfairly by the press. I'm acknowledging. He was treated unfairly by the press, by Nancy Pelosi, by all the Democratic members of Congress. The list goes on. People didn't give him a chance, even though all he was doing was winning, as Charlie Sheen used to say. So I acknowledge how unfairly former President Trump was treated. But that does not mean because he was treated unfairly that he is the best choice to go in. And I know, man, I know a lot of you guys that believe he is chosen by God to be the person to fix this country. And I am one of the things I love the most about God and Jesus is that they pick flawed people to do their work. Okay? So I completely understand what you're saying to me when you sit across the table from me and you say God has anointed Donald Trump to be the person to save us. But what scares me about that is that I do not believe that's the kind of language you use when you're talking about Jesus. That's the kind of language you use when you're talking about God. That should not be the kind of language you use when you're talking about someone who is elected to a position to lead you. It is a dangerous line to cross to put someone in a deity category. And that's all I'm trying to say. That is all I'm trying to say, is that be careful what you wish for. You might just get it. And I think there is a time, and I guarantee you, I don't know Donald Trump that well. I've only met him a couple of times, that he has told someone that he's fired this very statement. You know what? You were great at your job, but at this time, you're not the best fit to go forward. I guarantee you he has made that speech more than once to people that have worked for him. And I don't understand. I would love for someone to help me understand. I do not understand why in some way saying to a 78-year-old man that you did a great job, yes, you were treated unfairly, but you are not the best fit to be able to bring this country back together again. Help me understand it.
It's where North Georgia comes to talk. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
I've learned a lot about this thing called swatting in the last few days, where initially it started in the gaming community and went on from there. But we have Senator Cllint Dixon with us right now, and he represents portions of Gwinnett County and had two of these calls on over the holidays. And I really take issue with some of the reporting on this because in his hometown newspaper of record, the Gwinnett Daily Post, they call the caller a prankster. And you use a term like prankster, and it makes it sound like it's no big deal. So, Senator Cllint Dixon, how are you?
I am good, Martha. Thank you for having me on.
I really took issue with that terminology being used. But let's back up a little bit. Tell us a little bit about what happened to you on Christmas Day in the early evening.
Yes, ma'am. My in-laws and my mother had just left the house within an hour. It was about 6:30 that evening, and I was watching a football game on TV, and we were headed out of town the next day. So my wife was upstairs packing, along with my kids, playing with their toys they had gotten from Santa earlier that day, and I just heard a loud cry from my wife, "Hey, police are coming up our steps!" And so, of course, my immediate reaction, I run to the front door and I'm met by, half a dozen SWAT officers, with ARs and pistols drawn. So I immediately opened the door and, I really don't remember what I said. I was in complete shock. And they proceeded to tell me that there had been a call into their station that, a male had shot a female and there was a hostage situation. And I said, well, my first reaction was, what house? Is it in the neighborhood here? And they're like, it's here, it's your house. And, about that time, my wife comes to the door, and then, luckily for us, I knew several of the officers from the Northern Precinct there in Gwinnett, great officers. Had I not known them, they had reported to me that they did try to call me. They had my phone number from previous and known several of them, but I had my phone on the charger. Had I not known them, on the way in, they were communicating, saying, look, this is Senator Dixon's house. He's had threats and other things called before. It's probably false. It's so outlandish. Let's, use caution as we approach. But had they not known me, or had I not, answered the door immediately, they would have came in from the front and the back, and people could have gotten hurt or killed. I mean, it's a very serious situation. Of course, they invited them in, and they did their report, and left. But it is a very serious matter. It's not a prankster issue. It's a very least.
I mean, do you agree? Do you agree with me that term makes it sound like it's some nothing event? A prankster called 911.
It does, because it's not a prank at all. I mean, somebody could get, like I said, those officers had not known me. I probably would have been thrown to the ground and had a gun in my back. Them doing their job, of course. But luckily for me, they knew who I was, and luckily I met them at the door, but not a prank at all. No, somebody could get seriously hurt or killed.
How old are your children, Cllint?
I've got 3 children. My oldest, my son, is 16, and I've got 2 daughters, 13 and 10.
So how are they doing? I mean, this had to be scary for them.
Oh, it was, yes. Especially my son was on the far end of the house, but my 2 daughters were there, on the steps, as the police came up, and they were rattled along my wife. My wife was very, very upset and scared to death, to say the least.
Do they know anything about this person that made the call?
I have not gotten anything back yet. We got the second call. We were out of town the next day. The second call came in, similar in nature. The police responded again. This time it was, saying that somebody had been shot, and then the bomb was, they'd been threatened of a bomb being detonated at my house. So the bomb squad showed up, along with the ambulance, and my 76-year-old mother watching our dogs as we were out of town. But luckily, the captain had called me as they were coming in, and I was able to reach my mom, so she wasn't scared to death, as they approached the house.
So your mother was house
yes.
sitting for you, taking care of
Yes,
your
ma'am.
dogs, sitting there on the couch, and I mean, you were able to warn her about what was coming, but no one should have to go through this.
No, and she's got, a 76-year-old, I mean, that could, even if, just seeing the police come could cause somebody to have a heart attack, at her, elderly age.
So
it's terrible.
What are the penalties for this? Because this is false reporting of a crime, right? There's got to be some
That's correct.
penalties now for this. What are the penalties?
Yeah.
Do you know?
Yes, I do. The first offense is just a misdemeanor. If it involves critical infrastructure, it is elevated to a felony. Not a lot of details, on that. But then second offense would be a felony, punishable 5 years in prison. Or if the first offense, if someone's hurt, then it becomes a felony as well.
Now, I've done some digging into, because there's quite a range of these incidences that happened over the last week to 10 days. And most were against Republican elected officials. One was to a Democratic Secretary of State in Maine after Trump was taken off of the ballot up there. I don't care what party people are. I think there ought to be now a category, and I hate to make things more litigious, but there should be a category that if someone is an elected official and you perpetrate a crime like this against them, that should be a felony, because what they're trying to do is scare you into changing your position on something, who knows what.
That's right. You're correct. And I agree with you 100%. And, I've talked to Lieutenant Governor in his office last week during the holidays and intend on running legislation that would elevate that crime, along with also adding legislation in there as far as our disclosures, not changing what we have to disclose on our financial records, but or at least our personal address would be redacted from the public. Keeping those addresses were a little bit harder to find.
Yeah, I have mixed emotions about that, because you're representing an area, and but I agree with you. That's why I have mixed emotions. I feel a little conflicted about it, that we ought to be as transparent as possible. They have to know and verify that you live in the area, but at the same time, your address should not be public record, and
right.
that should be out of there. And look, one other thing I wanted to ask you about related to the anti-Semitism bill. That I hope that this bill related to swatting and the bill related to anti-Semitism should not be relegated to the last day of the session. I think we, as a people of Georgia, need to take a stand that we stand for law and order. We stand for the fact people are not going to be treated badly in Georgia, and that the government is going to stand up when people are treated badly. I think it's important that this is not relegated to day 40 of this session.
Yeah, you're spot on, Martha. I agree with you 100%. We need to get that legislation out first week.
Yeah.
And get it moving.
Yeah, because this kind of stuff should not happen. I can't even imagine. And look, when you're in the public eye, Cllint, it's part of things. I've gotten threats by the mail. I've had people, I had a woman a long time ago that was arrested, and I was on her list of people she was trying to get to. I understand it goes with the territory to some degree, okay? But when they start dragging your family into it, that's a whole different ballgame. It is,
and as you are and I am, public officials, we've signed up for this. We understand it, but once you start dragging my children and my wife into it, especially where they could be harmed, physically, it's just uncalled for, and we've got to do something about it, and I'm committed to do that.
Do you know?
And it should be a bipartisan issue.
I think so.
While I was out of town last week, heard from Senator Kim Jackson the Democrat that she represents. So I think she still has a little bit of Gwinnett, mostly DeKalb, and she was at home with her wife, and they've got a young baby, first Christmas with them, and they had a swatting call. I believe it was the day after Christmas.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's unfortunately one of these double-edged swords where it's getting some publicity, and because of that, there's some crazy people that think I might try that too. But I do think it's important for the story to be told, because people need to know what this feels like and what it's like when this happens. And I mean, if you hadn't had that Ring doorbell where you could see there was someone coming up your walk, or your wife could see that someone was coming up the walk, it would have been a much scarier situation.
Oh, yeah. They would have potentially busted in the door, and of course, not sure how I would have reacted to that, not knowing it was the police. A very, very scary situation. And as far as the finding out who calls from the Gwinnett PD, they tell me it's very difficult. But after the second swatting call, heard directly from the governor, who coordinated the GBI along with state troopers with Gwinnett County, and they're trying to track the caller down. So, but I haven't gotten any updates. Well,
I mean, they will figure this out. These people are not that smart. They'll get theirs at some point
You're right
in time.
About that.
But I'm really sorry that this happened to you and your family, especially that your children were there and your mom was there. And hopefully this will not happen again. Cllint, tell us quickly before you leave us what some of your legislative priorities are, because, hey, we'll be back next week.
Yes. I tell you, it's coming up quick. Legislative priorities, of course, chairman of Education and Youth in the Senate. So education issues are my priority. Number one, school safety. We've got several pieces of legislation you'll be seeing this year to tighten up school safety, and definitely helping rural counties as well. And then also literacy. I serve on the Literacy Council. We've got some exciting things coming up with it, more policy driven, not necessarily legislation. We will have some legislation, but very focused on getting our literacy rates up in the state. And as you and I discussed, we can't forget about math either. So, like I said, education's front and center for me next year.
I look forward to working closely with you on that, Senator.
Yes, looking forward to that, my friend.
Senator Cllint Dixon, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for being here, and we're so happy that your family was safe through all this difficulty over the holidays. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Martha, and thank you for what you do for our state.
Putting the talk in news talk. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
We are talking to Senator Joe Lieberman right now, who has been a longtime friend of the program, and we're happy to have him back. I hope you're having a wonderful New Year, Senator Lieberman.
So far, so good. I am. And great to be back with you, Martha. Congratulations on that award from Tucker's magazine. That's great.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate it. So here we are into 2024, and it does appear that we are careening towards having, a Democratic nominee and a Republican nominee that most people don't like. And we've got a lot of groups of traditional voters on both sides that are saying they don't feel represented. And No Labels is going to move forward with a convention in April and some other things. So just give us an update on where we are today.
Okay, I'm glad to. So, as you know, No Labels was formed in 2010 to try to break the partisan gridlock in Washington and Congress, between Congress and the president. And we've done that over time by supporting centrist or independent-minded Republicans and Democrats, and then bringing them together to work together. And it's worked really pretty well. They've been responsible for some of the rare accomplishments of Congress in recent years, like the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the so-called CHIPS innovation bill. But our members started to say to us about 2 years ago, hey, this city, our government's never going to change unless we have somebody at the top as president who's committed to bipartisan problem solving. And so we set out to raise money to qualify a third line ballot for this year's election, and we would give it to a bipartisan unity ticket. Just think about what a change that would be. Because, Martha, you're right. Both parties seem set on nominating candidates, President Trump, President Biden, who are not popular. I mean, when you ask the American people, do you want to? How do you feel about the choice of Trump and Biden again? 60 or 70% basically said, "Oh no, give us a third choice." And so, excuse me, that's what we're prepared to do by qualifying for the ballots and then deciding probably sometime February, March, and then a convention of some kind in April to whether there's a constructive role for us to play. We got to be honest with ourselves. Third parties have not had much of a successful track record in American politics, but maybe this is the year because, frankly, I've never seen so much anger at the two major parties and so much disappointment and worse at the two candidates that are likely to be elected. So maybe that the country is ready for a what Jefferson once called a little rebellion this year.
So one thing that the two parties do agree on is they like to make it difficult for other parties to get on the ballot. It's very easy for a Democrat or a Republican to get on the ballot. All you have to do is, qualify as a Democrat or Republican, go through the primary process, then you end up on the ballot. I mean, that's a lot of work, don't get me wrong, but it's not the same. So how is that process going right now?
Well, you are so right, and it leads me to just make this comment that, we've had this two-party system in America for a long time, and but it's nowhere in the Constitution that we even have political parties, let alone only two. There's no law that says that. But as the two parties have sprung up, you might say organically, needless to say, they have tried to protect their turf. And there's a professor at Harvard, I guess, Michael Porter, who says the Republican and Democratic parties have a duopoly, not a monopoly, but a duopoly over American politics, and there's something to that. And to get a third line on a ballot to run as a third party is really hard. Each state decides how it's done, and it's part of why we have to work so hard on it. But we're doing really well. We're working now in 27 states. The people carrying the petitions are a lot of them are people who do this as a job, and they tell us they've never had an easier task in asking people, do you want to sign a petition to have a third choice bipartisan unity ticket on the line in your state next year? And the reaction has been quite enthusiastic. So we're encouraged by it, but it ain't easy, and we're working hard at it.
The primary system was designed to sort of get the choices out of the smoke-filled rooms, if you will, and bring it to the people. But what my observation is what it's done is it's made the choices that come out of the primaries be farther left and farther right, depending upon where you're from. And I'm a conservative Republican, okay? I am a triple threat when it comes to being a Republican. I am conservative socially, I'm conservative fiscally, and I'm conservative on national defense policy. But I still can look at this and go, okay, we're not putting the best people forward. And I'm not saying we go back to the smoke-filled rooms. I'm not saying that. But I do think that the process does not bring forward the best people.
Well, you are so right. That's a big insight, and this is a classic example of how you do something that seems so good. In other words, sure, get the choice of candidates out of the boss-filled back rooms and let the people decide. But we've learned a lesson, which is that when you open it up to a primary, the people who feel most passionately in both parties are the ones who come out in the primaries in much greater numbers, and they tend to be further right in the Republican Party and further left in the Democratic Party. So their focus is on their own ideology. And there was something about the old boss backroom deals, which is that the bosses tended not to be very ideological. They had a singular goal or a major goal, and that was to win the next election. So in some ways, they actually reflected more the overall population and their choice of candidates. I mean, we're never going back to the back rooms. You're right. Some states, like California and a few others, have experimented with so-called open primaries, which means that all the candidates of all parties that are running for a particular office, state legislature, Congress, they run in one primary. And so you've got the whole sweep of the political spectrum voting. And then the top two vote getters run it off in a final primary, which basically you got to get 50% or more. And that tends to mean that the candidates know that they don't just have to appeal to the left or right of their party. They got to appeal more broadly if they want to get nominated. So far, I gather that's worked pretty well in the states where it's been tried.
Yeah,
but,
I went back to school about 8 years ago and got my master's degree in American politics, and my thesis was on women's electoral success in the Republican Party. And Chuck Bullock, who's been in this field forever, said, I wanted to look at women in general. And he said, no, Martha, you need to look at women in your own party because that's where the problem is. And what was interesting about it is that women in general are perceived to be more liberal than their male counterparts. And in fact, in the news yesterday, Tucker Carlson was calling Nikki Haley a Democrat because some Democrats like her. And that helps you in a Democrat primary. Being more liberal, perceived as more liberal, helps you in a Democrat primary, but it hurts you in a Republican primary. And that's why we've had a little more trouble getting women elected. But it was an interesting time. And I tell you what, being a 56-year-old graduate student with a bunch of 25-year-olds was a very great process for me. I want to ask you just one final question, just in really it's about current events. Of course, the war with Hamas in Israel. We're seeing anti-Semitism at a level in this country that I don't think we've seen in a very long time. We seem to have lost touch with the fact that Israel was attacked and civilians are being held hostage, and that there's some kind of moral equivalency between hostages and prisoners. I don't understand that. What are your thoughts on the war in Israel?
Well, based on what you just said, I agree with you totally, and I appreciate your thoughts. I mean, what happened on October 7th was really a massacre, and just the worst, and showed and what's happened since shows that Hamas, which has controlled Gaza, really is focused on destroying Israel, not on bettering the lives of the Palestinian people. And they scored a terrible, brutal victory on October 7th, but the Israelis obviously had to strike back. And, Hamas, it's awful to watch the Palestinian people suffering from this in Gaza, but that's Hamas's fault. They really expected Israel to strike back. They did nothing to provide any level of security for their own people, and worse than that, they invited Israel to a counterattack in a way that would hurt the Palestinian people, because Hamas, as we now know, built all its infrastructure, offices, supplies, weapons underneath the civil society above in Gaza. So inevitably, their own people would be targeted, but they didn't care about that because they invited. They knew Israel would have to respond, and they knew that the world would feel sympathetic to the Palestinian people. But thank God, in America, I believe the support and understanding of who's right and who's wrong here, who's good and who's evil, and where our friends are and where our allies are, has been held clearly by a majority of people. Not everybody, as we can see. I will say, finally, you mentioned anti-Semitism. I look back at my own life. Thank God, I have experienced almost literally no anti-Semitism in my career, in my life, and it's been a very public life. And I always understood that there were probably people out there who were anti-Semitic, but we had a national ethic in our country that made it impossible for them to express that hatred in public. And now, for many reasons, it's all off, and they're out. The worst part of people is out, and we just have to band together, not just against anti-Semitism, but all forms of hatred. The great American majority, which doesn't really feel that way, and push those haters back into the caves and under the rocks where they concealed their hatred for most of American history. Incidentally, I'm optimistic that we will do that, because most Americans don't like what's happening now in our country, and they're going to act to stop it.
And it's time, again, like in the late 70s, for the silent majority to be visible. Because I agree with you.
Amen.
In general, we are good people that know the difference between good and evil. And,
Absolutely.
I'm thankful you said that. You can go to nolabels.org and find out more information. Senator Lieberman, it's always my pleasure to speak with you, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Me too. It's my pleasure, too. A great conversation.
To hear the full versions of last week's Martha Zoller shows, go to the podcast page at accesswdun.com, and you can follow me on social media at Martha Zoller.